And I feel like it comes from older generations or maybe just people who don't understand how important mental health care is. We just expect us all to, pick ourselves up and put on a happy face. Depression is an incredibly common mental illness affecting 3.8% of the world population. This is according to the World Health Organization, which means that roughly 280 million people are affected by it. And even though it's that common, there are still many misconceptions about what it is, how it's treated, and what it can feel like. So let's get into 6 misconceptions about depression. And if you have any others that you want to add, feel free to leave them below in the comments. Oh, and if you're looking for more connection within our community, or you'd like to get your mental health questions answered, hop on over to my Patreon page. Just go to patreon.com/Kati Morton to check out all the rewards available. And I offer a variety of tiers to meet any budget. Starting off with misconception number 6, that depression only affects women. Depression rates are higher in women, but not by that much. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, or the NIMH, 10.5% of women and 6.2% of men are affected. However, I could even argue that, women are more likely than men to reach out for help and speak up about their depression, so it could be that men and women are equally affected, because we know that mental illness doesn't discriminate. It can affect any of us. So just remember that if you don't enjoy what you used to, have had changes in your appetite, like you're eating less or you're eating more than usual, or if you've been feeling down for most days for the past 2 weeks, what you're experiencing could be depression. And regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, you deserve to feel better and to get some help. The 5th misconception is that taking an antidepressant is the best treatment for depression. I've even heard people say that they think once you start an antidepressant, you have to be on it for the rest of your life, or your depression's just going to come right back. Now, yes, antidepressants can help with some symptoms of depression, but research again and again shows that it's medication plus therapy, which means in therapy we're beefing up our coping skills and we're making some much needed behavioral change. Think placing healthy boundaries. And that gives us the best result. So medication alone isn't as effective because we aren't really changing anything, right? I like to think of medication more as a life raft for when we find ourselves like drowning in the symptoms and we can't even participate in therapy because we just feel so bad. When we're depressed, we can lack motivation, think everything sounds terrible, and feel even worse about ourselves that we can't do the things that our therapist is offering us. Or even think, what's the point about almost everything? Medication can help us get our head above water so we can then do the therapy homework, like improve our communication skills, learn how to healthily express our anger, and implement some daily self-care. But it's not the best or only treatment for depression, and you don't have to take it forever once you start. Most of my patients actually go on it and then off it and then maybe on it again, depending on if their depression comes back. Some people find that, the winter time is more difficult for them, or certain seasons or anniversaries trigger a depressive episode. And we can take that into consideration and maybe increase your dose or put you back on it, depending on what you need. No one says you have to start and stay on it forever. So talk to a psychiatrist and make sure that they're hearing you and taking any of your concerns into consideration. The 4th misconception is everyone's depressed now. This one is incredibly frustrating to me, and I feel like it comes from older generations or maybe just people who don't understand how important mental health care is. And they aren't really used to people expressing themselves or talking about their issues and maybe just expect us all to, pick ourselves up and put on a happy face. But the reality is, depression does not affect everyone, but it does affect a lot of us. Remember, 3.8% of the world, roughly 280 million people have experienced it. And it's not just something the weak get and we have to man up or whatever just to get over it. Major depressive disorder is a psychological and biological condition, and no one chooses to have it. It can be chronic and requires treatment and care to manage. So if someone in your life speaks up about theirs, listen. The third misconception is that it's all in your head. Sure, there are components of depression that are psychological. We know that dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine levels are lower in the central nervous system of someone who has depression, which can lead to some symptoms like us feeling down most days or not enjoying or being interested in the things that we used to. But there are also physical symptoms like body aches, exhaustion, difficulty sleeping, changes in our appetite. Many of my patients will go to their primary care doctor first when they're having depressive symptoms because they often think they've just caught a cold or have the flu or something. Because, if we think about it, if we feel tired, kind of achy, or unmotivated, it kind of sounds like the start of a cold, right? Overall, no one is making it up. No one wants to be depressed. And we know there are changes happening in our central nervous system to cause our depression. And there are also physical symptoms as well. On to the second misconception, that depression is just feeling sad. Everyone seems to think that if you're sad for one day or for a chunk of time, that means you're depressed. But anyone who's suffered with depression knows it is way more than that. And what about irritable depression? I feel like this form of depression isn't talked about as often, and maybe it's because it doesn't look like depression. I'm not really sure, but many people will become easily upset and irritable when their depressive symptoms get worse. And I can understand why for many reasons. First, there seems to be a link or common comorbidity between anxiety and depression. And if you put those two together, that's some agitated depression, right? And next, if we aren't feeling like ourselves, right? I don't enjoy what I used to, and I'm struggling to sleep, and I'm hungry all the time. I can see how that would make me maybe not the most courteous or patient person in the world. Just like any mental illness, it's going to be different for each person who has it. And depression can look like a low or sad mood, but it can also look like lashing out. And these sweeping generalizations, like all of depression looks like this, can end up preventing someone from reaching out for help or make it so that when they do, they aren't taken seriously, which is why we have to stop these types of misconceptions. And finally, misconception number 1, that keeping busy will make our depression go away. I honestly don't know why so many people seem to think that ignoring issues and just focusing on something else is going to help us feel better. Sure, distractions have their place, right? We can't focus on how shitty we feel 24/7. It's exhausting. But ignoring our mental health completely is only going to make it worse. It would be like getting an infection. And instead of seeking treatment or trying to clean it out, we just cover it up real quick and get back to life. That's not going to do anything for that infection. In fact, it will only spread and cause us more issues. Mental health is the same as physical health, and we have to keep talking about it that way so that other people will start to understand and treat it as such. Keeping busy doesn't change our negative thoughts or improve our relationships, and it most certainly doesn't make our depressive symptoms go away. Getting into therapy and working on it does. These misconceptions are so common and not even an exhaustive list, which is why it's important to debunk them and offer real information so that the stigmas associated with it don't continue. And I know many of you are going to want to know some ways to better deal with our depression or how to help someone you love who is struggling. So let's end with some ways you can cope and help. First, let's talk about how to cope. One way to help improve our mood is to try out what is called behavioral activation. Now, this is a tool that we often use in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, but you can use it on its own, and essentially it's pushing ourselves to do more of what usually makes us feel good. I know, your depression makes you think everything is terrible, but if you used to love playing with your dog, do more of that. Or if you used to love knitting or scuba diving, mountain biking, or whatever, make time for it and do it more. It will slowly improve your mood. And just know that doing it once usually isn't enough, so please keep at it. It will slowly start to feel rewarding again and can improve your mood. This is also a lot like opposite action, which is part of DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, and that's just kind of like what it sounds like. When we want to isolate or do something that tends to hurt us, we do the opposite. And if that seems easier to understand and to do, then give it a try. Another way that we can help ourselves now is to journal. I know, writing things out takes time, and it's a hard habit to get the hang of, but trust me when I tell you that it works. I recently started doing this workbook with a friend of mine, and part of what it requires is that you journal 3 pages every morning. And I'm not gonna lie, I hated it, but I also feel lighter and more clear and just like less bogged down. It's wild. And I think because I haven't journaled regularly in probably 4 years, I know, I'm not practicing what I preach, but it's like I forgot how awesome it is. So don't knock it until you try it. And don't worry what it says or if you spell things right, if it's legible, or if it even makes any sense. You don't have to read journals back if you don't want to, and you don't ever have to share it with anyone else. Write it for you, and just let some of that excess ick out. And of course, therapy and medication can help us manage our depression. Make sure you find a therapist that you like, who listens and offers helpful ideas or tools for you to use. It makes you feel seen and heard. And also, please see a psychiatrist. And remember, their appointments are fast and they aren't always as warm as therapists, so have your questions ready. Ask about the side effects, how long you have to stay on something, all of that. And just feel free to read them off your phone. And don't let them leave the room until you've gotten answers to all of them. Remember, this is your health and it's your appointment. You get to take up space and their time. So ask those questions and get those answers. Finally, let's talk about the ways that we can support someone we love who may be struggling with depression. And unfortunately, we can't make anyone feel better. And we can't make them want to help themselves. And I know that sucks. And it can make us feel helpless. But there is still so much that we can do. First, we can support good decisions. Do they act somewhat okay with going out to lunch? Let's do it. Or maybe they briefly mention, that they're thinking about seeing a therapist. We can offer to take them or help them find someone good. If they're isolating and not wanting to see anyone, we can check in on them and offer just to come by. Just being there can be incredibly helpful. But when we're struggling, it can be too hard for us to ask for it. And notice that I didn't say that we come by and we tell them what to do or how they can feel better, because that isn't helpful. Literally just showing up and being there for them is all that they need. Listen to them and make sure you're listening to learn, not fix. Let them tell you what it feels like to them, what's upsetting, and how you can help. And if you're able, do those things. But remember, don't light yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm, okay? So make sure you've got healthy boundaries in place too. I hope that was helpful. I know how common depression is, and that's why it's so important that we talk about it in a real way. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye. And if you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe. It really does help.